Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. What we're going to imagine is a sunny day, a lovely sunny day in London. Yeah, late, torrential rain, horrific rain. Imagine the film Psycho and Anthony Perkins in the house in the distance sees Janet Leigh parking her car. She's turned off the driveway and she's arrived at the motel in torrential rain. So he puts an umbrella up and he runs towards the motel because he thinks, Janet Leigh. He's going to follow her. He's going to give her a room. The room has a hole in the wall and he is going to watch her. Alfred Hitchcock, folks. Welcome. I apologize for being late. The rain was horrific. Now, we've had 6 weeks of sun, of heat, of dryness. The area we're about to see in Shoreditch, it's dry. Shoreditch Park is dry, it's yellow. The park it looks like concrete. But I'm going to turn us around and show us what's happened in the last hour or so. So this is tricky. I'm so glad to be here. Yeah. The flash floods have happened, LNG. I mean, this is in the last hour or so. I've been hung out. I've just been waiting for it to stop. It stopped in such a way that I don't need an umbrella now, but it hasn't rained for 6 weeks in a proper way here. So I apologize if some of you have logged on and then logged off again and thought, what is going on? And I've started a bit further back. Yeah. I just texted Natalie now because I know that she was doing a tour in Chiswick. And she said that somebody said to her, I bet you're glad of the rain. Yeah, we're glad of it for the gardens and for the wildlife and for everything else. But for doing a tour, if it starts to pour down with rain in the middle of everything, or just before you're doing the tour, you worry. Still torrential in East London. Well, at some point, we may need to pause and I can get the umbrella out of my backpack. We're in Shoreditch, everyone. It was humid. Joy has asked, is it humid in London? It was. It feels quite nice now, temperature-wise. I work with Celsius. It feels about 19, 20, so it doesn't feel too bad. Early this morning, I was doing a couple of tours around the South Bank and it didn't feel as cool as this. It was very humid this morning, but then the rain has cooled everything down. It's cooled the buildings down, the stone. So Shoreditch, the area we're in, is possibly a shoreline. The riverbank of an old river, the Walbrook. Possibly a sewer ditch, a drainage ditch dug up. But what we do know is back in the 12 and 1300s, this area was muddy and boggy. Didn't have any of these paved streets back then. And the ditches would have had to have been dug in this area to basically let the rainwater go in certain directions. There is a folk myth that there was a woman that was the mistress of Edward IV, Jane Shore, and that she was buried in a ditch, so they had called it the Shoreditch. But that reference happened after the name. The name happened before. Now, Shoreditch as well is quite famous for being the area where the Burbage family. James Burbage, the father of the two Burbage brothers, 1576, built a theatre just up to the left of us, and it was the first purpose-built theatre in London. It was called the Theatre. It was the only one, it was the first one, so you didn't need to specify. You called it the Theatre. And then the Curtain Theatre was built a couple of years after that. Let's have a look at this. This is in the last hour and a half. I did my test tour in dry weather 2 hours ago. And you may have seen that I just stepped back. And we're in the borough of Hackney. It used to be the parish of Islington. The borders have slightly changed over the years. There are about 35 boroughs in London, parish boroughs. This area became quite well known for furniture making, fabric and textile manufacture in the 1800s. There were many factories and power stations. And one of them, these power stations, the Islington power station, was eventually converted into a film studio. And that's why we're in this area. We could be in Leytonstone in East London, where Alfred Hitchcock was born. But all of the buildings that are associated with him are not there anymore. But there is one section of this area which is associated with him, and there's a bit of a reveal at the end of the tour in Gainsborough Studios, which is where he worked and made 18 short films. We're also approaching, we'll slightly go up a little path here, a slight hill to the Regent's Canal, which is nearly 9 miles long, or 14 kilometres, and it opened in 1812. And it was like a ditch. It was dug into the ground. And it was to provide extra waterways for barges and boats to bring petrol and coal, etc., to the nearby factories. He lived in Leytonstone. He also lived in Kensington for a while. So many people think, because he became famous as a Hollywood film director, that Hitchcock was Hollywood, American. He had a very strange accent, very interesting, mannered way of speaking. I need to turn us around to show that this pavement covering normally only happens in September and October. But the dryness, the 6 weeks, the heat wave that we've had, this is happening in the middle of August. I don't know if you folks, any of you, are gardeners. If you're not, you should be. Gardening's one of the best things for mental health. One of the greatest ways to just chill out. You plant something and you know that in a few months something will grow. Seed packets, and I bought a few of them in the last 3 years or so. Especially with COVID, the pandemic, we've realised that looking forward to something has helped us through this. But seed packets in the last 3 or 4 years, the weather's slightly changed, and you can often find that you can plant tomatoes, you can even plant potatoes in June and July, even though they say, oh, you need to plant them in February. But in this country, the seed packets, well, they need to change the dates on them. Just going to pop down and have a look at the Regent's Canal here. It's nearly 9 miles long. So Susan has said that she has two arms longer than they were at the start. Watering cans are heavy. We're starting to have our hose pipe ban next week, and I've made this joke, and I have put it on Facebook, and I've also mentioned it on tours, and also mentioned it in posts on the app, and I want it copyrighted, that we're talking about a hose pipe ban. I bought 15 hose pipes about a month ago, so I have no issue with the hose pipe ban because I bought so many of them in advance. Thank you. I need to get some. That's good. Yeah, Jan was the first one to do that. I need to show you. I've got so many photos here, it's quite tricky to show you what things looked like back in the old days. But Gainsborough Studios was where Alfred Hitchcock worked for many years. He made silent films here, 18 of them. And what we're looking at in the distance is the old Gainsborough Studios, now turned into apartments. This photo on the chat is what it used to look like from here. So right in the centre of the screen are the apartments. I also need to show you another couple of things. The two pubs here. The Southgate Arms. Peter Sellers and Richard Todd starred in a feature film, Never Let Go, in 1960. And some of it was filmed at the Southgate Arms. That is now apartments. And next to it is the Rosemary Branch pub. One of the first plays I ever did, and I've been an actor 25 years, was here. The pub has been here since the 1820s. My play wasn't then. The first theatre production was in 1986. I wasn't here then. I'm far too young. The pub would have been busy back in the days where the canal was used for transporting goods. So we're over the Regent's Canal. There is an area in this direction we carried along further on called Little Venice. And I know that Little Venice, quite a few people have said, we need a tour of Little Venice. And we will get that. But this area, a small apartment, was rented by Alfred Hitchcock when he worked at Gainsborough Studios. He was born August 13th, 1899, the youngest of three children. Julia Effer said Hitchcock's film Frenzy was filmed around Covent Garden. It was. Hitchcock's father, William, he was a bit of a workaholic. He was a greengrocer. He had two shops. He spent 16 hours a day out at work. He used to go to Covent Garden and he would buy fruit and veg and take them back to Leytonstone, East London, for the greengrocers. So 16 hours a day. They were talking working 16 hours a day, never mind sleeping. So Alfred, even though he had two siblings, he started to develop obsessions. One of them was going to the cinema, silent movies in those days. Going on London transport was another. And by the age of 8, he had memorized basically every route timetable on the new electric tram system. Now we have our tubes. That wasn't existing back in the early 1900s. A little bit further along in East London, the tube system was developed. But the tube system in his day was happening in central London. Probably explains his cameos in his own films. He's either getting on or off at a train terminus. Made so many cameos in his films. 39 of the films he ended up appearing in. Probably the most well-known of them was in Lifeboat. Now, the film Lifeboat in the 1930s, it's all set after a ship has sunk and everyone is on a lifeboat. And you think, how would Alfred Hitchcock have a cameo in that film? Well, he did. Somebody is reading a newspaper, and there is a before and after shot of somebody who is wearing new trousers with an elasticated waist. And Alfred Hitchcock is that man in that picture, that advert. It seems that his father, as well as being a workaholic, was very strict. The reason we've stopped for a moment, just on the side of what would have been the Gainsborough Studios. I've only stopped here because it's pouring for a moment. He did many interviews with the French film director Francois Truffaut. We have Truffaut and Hitchcock, a book, and there are audio recordings of it as well. And Hitchcock said that when he was about 4, possibly 5, his father sent him to a police station, Harrow Road police station, and he sent him with a note. Hitchcock didn't know what was in the note. The chief of police read the note, put him in a cell at the age of, at the maximum, 5 years old. He locked the door for about 15 minutes, and when Hitchcock looked up at him, he said, "This is what we do to naughty boys." Might explain some of the films, the guilt, the fear. The police were always quite prevalent in a lot of Hitchcock's early films. Hitchcock never worked out why he was there, what he was being imprisoned for those 5 to 10 minutes. Although he lived in Leytonstone, went to school in Battersea. Now, Battersea is in southwest London, SW11. And after this, if you want to have a little look at where Salesian College is, it's just off Battersea Bridge. The link between Hitchcock and me is that I went to Salesian College between the ages of 11 and about 16. The exact same school, I went there. Now, obviously, Hitchcock was born in 1899, and I am in my early 20s, so it wasn't at the same time. Thank you very much. Thank you for the laughter. It helps a tremendous amount. So we're just going to stand under here for a moment. It's quite crazy, isn't it? But what we're seeing in the distance is Shoreditch Park. So Hitchcock wasn't living in this area. He was living in Leytonstone, about 6 miles from here. He started to work in the offices of a local paper, drafting adverts. He gave articles to different newspapers, and then started to work quite heavily in the advertising department of the Henley Telegraph. Another link to what he did later in his life. Journalists, investigative reporting, they feature quite heavily in the films. And also visually, a lot of the lead characters, they hide behind newspapers in lobbies of hotels. At the age of 15, Hitchcock left Leytonstone, never to live there again. He went to engineering college for a while. At the age of 19, he got the first job in film, working for the Players Lasky studio in London. Paramount owned the Players Lasky. That's what it was known as in the 1920s. They also called it Pool Street, sometimes Islington, sometimes they named it Avery Court. So this is a throwback to what it used to be known as. Then the name Gainsborough stuck. The Gainsborough Studios, historically, is what it's known as now. There was a company that made melodramas, the Gainsborough Pictures Company. Thomas Gainsborough had painted a portrait of Sarah Siddons, very famous actress in the 17 and 1800s. And they just said, well, let's name it after his portrait. They used a lot of studios. Pinewood was the main one, but they made costume drama. So if you ever hear Gainsborough Pictures, you will basically hear about costume-based melodramas. In the UK, and I don't know if the guys in the States and Canada and abroad can get this, but there are certain TV channels. We have one in the UK called Talking Pictures, and they show old films from the 1920s and 1930s. Some of them are silent. Some of them have what we now know as Vitagraph, which is playing a record next to a movie. But a lot of them were early talking films from the 1930s, basically based on historical romances, written by women, interestingly enough. The Man in Grey was one. Madonna of the Seven Moons, The Wicked Lady, Fanny by Gaslight is quite a famous film. Back to Hitchcock. He rented a flat here on this site. He became what we now know as a titles man, and this was in 1919. Silent movies were the thing. He created intertitles. So imagine watching a silent film, and we've all seen them, and then we see the titles, the written dialogue or the exposition, the explanation between the physical action which is happening on the screen. His previous work, his work in advertising, and he said this years later, it gave him a great sense of what looked good on a screen. He had this idea, and he kept it throughout his life. Whenever he adapted a story, a novel, a book, somebody told him a story, maybe in a cafe. If it was a famous novel, he was always encouraged to adapt famous novels. He was a famous director. He was well respected visually, and they would say, can you adapt War and Peace, let's say? And he said, no, War and Peace is perfect as a novel. I need to get a story which I can adapt. What he wanted to do was slightly change the story itself. He wanted suspense. Suspense was something that we now associate with Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense. One of his best explanations of this was, if you can imagine two people, husband and wife, let's say, in a restaurant, in a cafe, in a pub, having a conversation. They're talking for 10 minutes. He wanted to show the difference between shock and suspense. If after 10 minutes of them speaking, suddenly there's an explosion, there's a bomb that's been planted under the table, but nobody has seen the bomb, certainly not us watching the film. The bomb goes off, it's shock, it's surprise. And he said, what if at the beginning of the scene, the camera is showing under the table, showing a bomb. And then gradually the camera pans up to show the two people speaking. We're not thinking about what they're speaking about. We're wondering if that bomb or when that bomb will go off. So silent cinema and the Gainsborough Studios, this is what worked for him, and this is what changed everything, and this is what inspired him. We're lucky that we had Hitchcock when we did. If he had started to work with dialogue-based movies, he might not have been the visual director that we now know him as. Can we hear thunder in the background? So, 1919, Gainsborough Studios, a film was being made, and it was called The Sorrows of Satan. And I'm going to keep jumping little sections as we speak. Now, it is almost what we call rush hour in London, and I can't see anyone on the streets, not in this section. They're all hiding under coverings. The Sorrows of Satan was a novel written by Marie Corelli. Hitchcock read in a newspaper. He worked in advertising, and so he had access to trade newspapers, that Paramount had acquired a studio in Islington, which is now Shoreditch. At this point, I need to apologise, first of all, if I'm not looking at the chat and I'm not answering questions. Please don't get upset about that. It's pouring with rain. My phone, my gimbal, is soaked. So I can't really see my screen. I know that what we can see is what we would call a housing estate, social housing. But where we're going to get to is the site of the Gainsborough Studios, which is behind. But what I'm trying to do right here is explain the story of Hitchcock, and then we'll make a run for it. And you've got my back. I know that. You always have. So in a moment or two, we're going to make a little run for it into Shoreditch Park. I'm trying to concentrate on the story. Marie Corelli. He read in this newspaper, they're making a film of this novel. They had acquired this studio. They had bought a studio just here. It's now flats. Holds umbrella over Jared. Emma B, you're my favourite. I love it though. I love that we're here together, and I'm going for it. I wouldn't cancel this for the world, even if I had to film this in the toilet of a cafe. Hitchcock, probably the greatest director, the most influential for modern film directors, even theatre directors are now obsessed by Hitchcock. We need to tell this story. So what he did, he created title cards. So imagine, I've been an actor 25 years. Imagine I wanted to be in a show or a film, and I sent Steven Spielberg a show reel. I filmed myself here. I knew he was making a film, and the film was going to be set during a monsoon. So what I would do is film myself here in the rain. And I think I can talk about what I want right now. But he knows that I've come out here and I'm filming in the rain. Hitchcock decided to film title cards. He sent them to the studio. He was hired as a title designer. And you know the reason why he was hired? Because most of the crew working on this film were Americans. Now, that is not an insult. The Americans had strong unions. They had strict job specifications. He was hired because he was a Brit. They could use him a bit. He became a runner. He became a props boy, a set designer, a production manager, a co-writer. They made him do everything. Anywhere there was a gap, they got Hitchcock involved. He was encouraged. He was used. And he worked on at least 18 short, silent films. And then somebody gave him an assistant director job. In 1922, he had a shot at directing. The film was called Number 13. I'm sure it's a great film, but only a few scenes survive. A few scenes were shot, and the film has been lost forever. And then in 1923, they said, direct this film. Always Tell Your Wife, it was called. A short film, also lost. But in only 3 years, he had gained the experience to be an assistant director. 2 years after that, Michael Balkan, the owner of Ealing Studios in West London, Ealing Studios, they asked Hitchcock, Balkan himself, to direct his first full film, and it was called The Pleasure Garden. And he went to Munich. He worked in German expressionist film. This is Gainsborough Studios, by the way. This is the site of Gainsborough Studios. I'm literally walking over a pool of water. I don't mind. He came back here to London, to Gainsborough. He filmed The Lodger with Ivan Novello, his first thriller. He made his first cameo appearance, sitting in a newsroom, again related to what he did, a tradition. He always used either travel, train, buses, trams, because it was something he was obsessed by. But the reason he made his first cameo appearance simply was because they couldn't afford an extra. He then became one of the early members of the London Film Society. He became fascinated with Russian film, Eisenstein, Podovkin. And then in 1929, he worked on his first sound movie, Blackmail. Then a series of dramas and melodramas. And then Hollywood beckoned in the late 1930s. His final film for Gainsborough Studios was The Lady Vanishes in 1938. And then he went to Hollywood. Oh my goodness. So now it's apartments in Shoreditch Park. And we have a slight bit of cover from the trees, the London plane trees. In the 1500s, a lot of these trees came from Spain, the seeds. They have small root compaction. They don't dig up and disturb the concrete and rock foundations. They don't stretch, they grow in balls. Over in the distance, we see a film reel, because we are at the site of Gainsborough Studios. That is how they filmed, on a reel. When they made North by Northwest, Hitchcock was working in Hollywood. He was upset that studio execs, producers, would then edit the film. The Hollywood studio system said, you give us the film and we'll edit it into how we think it should feel. So what he did with North by Northwest, he filmed 8 feet, 5 seconds of extra filming that he gave to them. Everything was storyboarded. Everything was titled and drawn. He never wasted any work. And so when the execs, the producers said, we need to work on this film. We don't like the way you've edited this film. And it happens today. Scorsese and people like that, they have exec control. They're executive, producers. But in the old days, you filmed something as a director and you gave it over to the money men, and then they edited the film the way they wanted. Joy has said, a relative of my ex was a suspect in the Ripper murders. He was named in The Lodger. Oh my goodness. That is wonderful, Joy. That is literally the first comment I've managed to be able to read on the chat in the last half an hour. Okay, so 1941, Rebecca was nominated for an Oscar. He was nominated 4 more times, never won for Best Director, which is ridiculous. 1955 to 1965. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Now, myself and my partner, Catherine, on Sky Arts, the TV channel, at the moment, they are syndicating. They're showing every single one of those episodes. They show them regularly to this day. Hitchcock became famous as an icon as much as his films did. And in 1960, in the middle of the TV show Alfred Hitchcock Presents, he decided to film Psycho. He had made Vertigo, which was popular, a colour film. And he wanted to make another film, a darker film, with a new star, Anthony Perkins. And the studio said, no, I don't like the idea of that. And he said, I'm going to make it anyway. I'm going to make it with my TV crew on the cheap. And he said years later, he sent the producers the film footage every day. 9 minutes of dialogue he filmed every single day, which is impossible in these days. 9 minutes of dialogue he filmed a day. And then the shower scene, over 70 shots, 45 seconds of film. It took a week to film that. Hitchcock always said, in interviews, that if he could cut dialogue, as much dialogue as he could, he would. He worked in silent film. And he said a shot would always show more and tell more than dialogue could. And this is where he worked, 18 films. Short films, and then talkies. Probably his most famous is Psycho. He killed off Janet Leigh, who was a big film star, a third of the way into the film. People said, don't do that. She should be the sister in the film, the investigator. And he said, no, I want to kill her off. None of this, none of Hitchcock's life, his career, none of his successes, none of his influences. And I went to film school. I studied, my degree was in film studies. Before I ever went to drama school, I studied film. And we now know, and we celebrate it, none of it would have happened if it wasn't for Alma Reveal, his wife. From 1926 until his death in 1980, she was born in Nottingham within hours of Alfred in 1899. And she became a cutter, an editor at the age of 16 at Twickenham Studios in West London. She then became a script writer and director's assistant. And in 1919, the same year that this titles man, this young lad, Alfred, became doing basically a simple job at Gainsborough, she became a film editor. And the first film they worked on together was in 1923, and they continued to work together until the end. And this is the site of Gainsborough Studios. In his early career, Alfred was known to turn to Alma after each take and say, was it all right? Or, was it all right? And then he would move on. And over the years, she gradually moved further into the background. Alfred's persona, that became larger than life. But she was always his advisor. And we have the numbered studios, which are now apartments. So we are at the site of Gainsborough Studios. Alfred made a speech in 1979. He never won an Oscar as Best Director, but he won the American Film Institute Lifetime Achievement Award. And he said the following: I beg to mention, by name, only 4 people who have given me the most affection, appreciation, and encouragement, and constant collaboration. The first of the 4 is a film editor. The second is a scriptwriter. The third is the mother of my daughter, Pat. And the 4th is as fine a cook as ever performed miracles in a domestic kitchen. And their names are Alma Reveal. Had the beautiful Miss Reveal not accepted a lifetime contract without options as Mrs. Alfred Hitchcock some 53 years ago, Mr. Alfred Hitchcock might be in this room tonight. Not at this table, but as one of the slower waiters on the floor. I share my award, as I have my life, with her. Alma Lucy Revel Hitchcock passed away 2 years after Alfred. Both buried in Hollywood. But Gainsborough is where they met, where they fell in love, and where they made films together. Now, we can talk about Hitchcock as a person, and maybe in the future we will. He was antagonistic, dismissive. He could be quite rude, cruel. His female leads veered between calling him a bully and an inspiration. But there's no doubt he's up there. He's up there with the greatest: Scorsese, Wells, John Ford, Kurosawa. One of the greatest directors in history. And this is the site of the Gainsborough Studios where he made 18 films. And it inspired him to go on to probably becoming the greatest. The German Expressionism, the Russian work that he was obsessed by, the 39 cameos, well, that's all part of it. The zoom dolly, the Zolly, where a camera, if I zoomed in on this window with the zoom feature on Hago, but then I also ran back. It's been seen in Goodfellas, but most famously in Jaws, with Richard Dreyfuss on the beach. Well, he basically made that famous. And they've honoured him here. Anthony Donaldson created this, 2002. In the centre of Gainsborough Studios, the main floor, now on top of an architect's. And this is this iconic man, surrounded by 3 studios. And it's iron, it's rusted. But we'll never forget that face, that visage. And now, it's a great sculpture, Anthony Donaldson. Thank you, LEG. Thank you very much. I've suddenly managed to see the screen. Okay. Folks, Robin has said, Hitch's chubby face, so interesting. Okay, we gave it a go. I think we did well. The phone is soaking wet. The gimbal is soaking wet. I'm soaking wet, but don't worry about that. Hopefully, there was something interesting in there for everyone. Paula said, oh my goodness, the chat's moving quick. A double feature of Jaws and Farewell to Arms. I love it. Thank you, Anne, Karen, and so on. I love Hitchcock. I studied film before I went to theatre school, and Hitchcock's probably the most influential. I've worked with a lot of film and TV and theatre directors, and the best experiences I've had in them have been the people who have been nice. And they're the ones I remember. And people say, oh, well, the job was great. And I say, yeah, but I didn't have a great time doing it. But the way Hitchcock worked, he was a genius. He didn't worry too much about the way the actors felt. Cary Grant would always say, this doesn't feel right. And Hitchcock would say, well, it looks fantastic. And that's what we want. Slightly different to theatre, which is kind of what I wanted to do when I was growing up, wanting to be an actor. But film work, slightly different. And so he was cantankerous. He was a difficult guy, but he made some amazing films. I went to theatre school, Drama Studio Ealing, in West London. Yeah, Cary Grant, North by Northwest is a work of genius. I did forget, by the way, with the rain on the screen, that we're still filming me. What am I doing? This guy is much more beautiful. Rebecca's wonderful. Rope, I believe, is all supposed to be one take. Thank you for the enjoyable tour, Scott. A dreary day, raining in Connecticut. Lovely spending time. Oh, please join me again, Scott. I love that. I'm going to start doing a few talks at home. I like walking around the West End theatres, but I also love talking about film. And there may be this idea in the future of sharing some kind of film clips, especially with somebody like Hitchcock. You can't talk about him and not share a film clip. While we're here, I have many images that I want to share that I've spoken about. Cameos. So if you've got the chat closed, open the chat. I'm just going to share a load of them. This is him in Lifeboat. Because it's all set on a boat, you can't get him on a boat, so they put him on a newspaper. This is him and Alma. Great film with Helen Mirren and Anthony Hopkins. This is interesting. This one is one of my favorites. So it's Ingrid Bergman and a teacup which is enormous. It's a foot wide, but he wanted to get deep focus and he couldn't really work it out, so he just built a wide teacup. Oh my goodness. Victoria said, forgot to take postcards. We're going to do this again very, very soon, probably in the next week when it's good weather. You know what? This isn't bad weather. Billy Connolly always said, the greatest comedian of all time, I think, he said there's not good weather and bad weather, there's just appropriate clothing. Thank you, Susan. Yes, if you click on the images, it enlarges. But I've got so many photos that I wanted to share. Now, I showed you that film reel, but there's a version of it from the distance. The film reel with the studios in the background. And that's that. That was on a sunny day. And I took that photo when I did my original research. There is the studios. Back in the 1940s. Just before it closed, there was a plaque on a wall just by it. Okay, let's keep doing this. So, slightly different view of Hitch. I took so many of these. This is where we're stood, actually. This is what this is. So this area around us with all the studios around us. That's the inner floor where they built most of the enormous sets. Suddenly found a bit of a dry area. What else do I have? Okay, so I showed you a doorway earlier. That's what would have been behind the door. There's another view when before it was the Gainsborough Studios, it was the Islington Power Station. Scott, I said it looks like a Buddhist statue. Yeah, it's got that kind of serenity for a man that was probably a bit cantankerous. He always said, he said in a few interviews that actors were like cattle. And they said, well, what about Cary Grant? What about Jimmy Stewart, James Stewart? And he said, well, they were nice cattle. So there's nice cattle and not so nice. Okay, there we go. It's so weird. It's so weird. I'm underneath the covering and I'm still getting soaked. I don't know what's happening. We're actually underneath something that is supposed to cover me from rain, and I can feel something on top of me. I don't understand. Anna said there was a documentary on that statue on UK TV. I'm going to look that up. I love this. I am literally going to stand in this doorway now and dry everything off. I don't know how, because everything I've got on me is wet. There may be a part of my clothing that is dry. I may use that part of clothing to dry everything else off. You do not want to see that. I'm going to leave you be. Please follow. Just follow me, honestly. I've got so many tours coming in, and quite a few film ones, and the history of different actors and poets and so on in October. Don't worry, guys, about things that are being discussed about sponsorship and all of that. Just follow me. I'm continuing on with tours. Nothing will change. In fact, I'm doing more and more tours in September and October, and brand new ones. Don't worry about it. We're not going anywhere. So we'll all chill out about it, and we'll enjoy being together. Of course, us guys, we're guiding, we research, we want to be paid for it, we kind of want to make a living from it. But if you start thinking, I'm doing it for money, you start cutting corners. I do this because I enjoy it. Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. There is a line in that. If you build it, they will come. If I do a good tour, and lots of us try to do good tours, then everything will be okay, but nothing will change. Don't worry. I enjoy all of this. And I have done tours for other platforms, and I swear on my life, I did a tour on another platform the other day. I did 1 hour in the West End, in the rain, and I made, after commission, £2. And I didn't worry about it. I just said, I built it. And they came. Not many of them came, but they came. And I just said, well, that's done. I'll do the next one. Everything is good. And we need to not worry about it, because us guides, the ones that enjoy it, will keep going. I love this. I love doing this. Yeah, please be back. I'll stick to Hago. I'm not going anywhere. I swear on my life, I'm not going anywhere. I was in a cafe earlier, and there's a guy that has lived here for 20 years, and he said, what are you up to? Taking shelter from the rain? And I said, yeah, I'm doing a tour on a streaming channel, Hago. We're an amazing bunch. We're talking about Alfred Hitchcock. And he said, oh, what has he got to do with this area? And I said, have you lived here for 20 years and you don't know? I said, have you been into the Gainsborough Studios apartments? And he said, no. And I said, there's a 30-foot high statue. Go in there, please. And he said he would. Okay, 45 minutes. I thought I might last about 20 minutes because of the rain. And I've done 1 hour. But that's me. My partner Catherine says you ramble on too much. Please stop talking for the love of God, she says. But no. Oh, okay. Now, so this is the problem now. But I've suddenly, the gimbal has become so wet that I'm now holding it with my hand. Okay, it's all gone horrifically wrong. But there he is. Alfred Hitchcock. There should be Alma. Alma should be there as well. She was a big part of it. Thank you so much. I need to dry things off. Lots of love to you all. I will see you very soon. Thank you. Thank you for your appreciation. And let's all just continue to enjoy it because none of us are going anywhere. Take care. Bye-bye.